Welcome to the Minority Report. In this episode, we unpack the German atrocities committed in Namibia at the turn of the 20th century. Stay tuned. If you like this content, please feel free to subscribe and hit that like button. The wounds inflicted on 60,000 Herero and 10,000 Namas in the erstwhile colony of Southwest Africa have yet to heal. The scars from the exhibition of human remains in museums and the manipulation for racist scientific hypotheses are added to the scars from concentration camps and slave labor. After a century of denial, both countries' governments agreed to compensate each other for 1.1 billion euros over 30 years. However, the victims' relatives do not believe their demands are being heard. Germany announced on May the 28th, 2021, that it had achieved a reconciliation agreement with Namibia. Between 1904 and 1908, it committed genocide against the Herero and Nama peoples in Southwest Africa, which is now Namibia, according to this agreement. The German Bundestag, or the German Federal Parliament, and the Namibian Parliament must yet approve the deal. The draft agreement is one of the first formal reconciliation agreements to be negotiated on a state-by-state basis between a former colonial authority and a former colony. On October the 2nd, 1904, General Lothar von Trotha, the leader of the German soldiers, issued an order that amounted to an extermination decree. Homesteads and livestock stations belonging to the Herero people were attacked and their inhabitants were massacred. Approximately 60,000 Herero and 10,000 Nama people were killed by German soldiers. However, as some genocide survivors point out, it is important to evaluate not only the number of individuals killed but also the social, economic and psychological consequences. On August 11th, 1904, German forces attacked Herero who had congregated at Omahakari in central Namibia to discuss a peace deal. Hundreds of Herero were slain outright, and those who fled to the Omaheke region in the east were pursued and killed. In their attempts to cross the Omaheke and flee into Bechuanaland Protectorate, which is now Botswana, an unknown number of Herero died of dehydration. Between 1904 and 1908, the Germans massacred and murdered Namibians, including not only Herero and Nama, but also San and Damara. Thousands of Herero and Nama were imprisoned in concentration camps where they endured atrocious living conditions such as food shortages, water shortages, and the shortage of medical care. Others were forced to work as slaves on German farms and ranches, building roads and railways, and in the mines. There were various stages to this genocide against the Herero and Nama. The first had both fighters and non-combatants being massacred. The second step involved setting up a perimeter in the Omaheke district and tracking down and transporting Herero refugees who had fled the Battle of Omahakari. The third phase involved the adoption of a scorched earth policy intended at ruining the Herero and Nama people's livelihoods by demolishing their homes, their sacred places, as well as seizing or killing Herero and Nama cattle, goats, sheep, and burning their crops. Now, between the end of the formal war and the closure of the concentration camps in 1907 and 1908, hostilities continued, with the massacre of Herero, Nama, and others continuing until South African forces took over Southwest Africa and supplanted the German colonial state in 1915. Now, despite the German government's overt efforts to purge archival records of proof of genocide and the huge human rights violations, victim groups worked to preserve knowledge of the first genocide of the 20th century and to memorialize the deaths of Herero, Nama, and San, and the Damara, and others. The presence of human remains of Herero, Nama, and San in German museums, medical institutions, and hospitals was one of the most painful memories of the genocide. Over the next century, German academics experimented with skulls, bones, and complete corpses. Some of the experiments were designed to substantiate the racist scientific beliefs that dominated German physical anthropological viewpoints on race until the end of World War II and beyond. Human remains from Herero and Nama people have been displayed in museums in some situations. When the treatment of Herero and Nama remains became public in the early 21st century, there was an outrage, particularly when stories emerged of Herero women in the concentration camps of Lüderitz and Swakopmund being forced to prepare the skulls of people who died in the camps for transport to German institutions. However, there were some tiny victories, such as Germany's decision in the early 21st century to repatriate Herero and Nama skulls and other human and cultural remains to Namibia. Between 2011 and 2018, these remains were repatriated from German hospitals, museums, and other organizations. However, there were no formal apologies for how the human remains of the Herero and Nama were handled while in German hands. The German Minister for Development and Economic Cooperation apologized in the Omakari, Namibia, on August 14, 2004, for the atrocities done by German forces against the Herero and the Nama. Other German government leaders later recognized the horrors as genocide and begged pardon for their crimes against the Namibian people. Between 2015 and 2021, Germany only met with the Namibian government to discuss how to deal with the genocide's aftermath in a series of talks. There were almost no negotiations with victims' descendants, and the traditional authorities were not allowed to participate in the reconciliation accord negotiations. Germany and Namibia tentatively inked this deal on in May 2021, which involved payment of 1.1 billion euros for development projects in Namibia over a 30-year period. The Namibian government is planning to provide development assistance in 7 of the country's 14 areas where the Herero and Nama make up the bulk of the population. Individuals or communities would not be compensated, unlike Australia's recent reconciliation accord, which promised to give 75,000 Australian dollars to some of its Aboriginal population who were forcefully separated from their families as children. The proposed reconciliation agreement emphasizes Germany's moral and political recognition of the genocide. Germany, on the other hand, claims to have ruled out financial compensation for the genocide. This means Germany does not want to set a legal precedent for paying reparations that would force the German government to compensate victims of its colonial and post-colonial practices financially. Similarly, the Namibian Accord can serve as a model for future discussions with former French, British, and Portuguese colonies in Africa. Land, some of which is still in the hands of German Namibians, was one of the important topics not included in the reconciliation agreement. Although the Herero and Nama believe that land restitution should be included in the reconciliation agreement, the Namibian government has chosen to ignore these pleas. Namibia published a report in 2020 on ancestral land claims in the country, arguing that the land could not be taken away from people who held it without a willing seller, willing buyer arrangement. The reconciliation agreement between Germany and Namibia has yet to be finalized. What is clear is that the Herero and Nama, as well as the San and the Damara, believe the agreement does not include anything or everything they believe they are entitled to in terms of reparations and compensation for the human rights violations they suffered and continue to suffer at the hands of the German colonial state. They believe that the only way to accomplish reconciliation is for victims' descendants to be actively included in decision-making regarding how grave human rights crimes and their consequences should be handled. That's the show. Until next time, bye for now.